And I'll go ahead and begin introductions. So thank you all for joining us. This is the session titled Shift Happens, Tweaking Our Language to Reduce Cognitive Load for Stressed Out Students. And our presenter today is Dr. Jennifer Daines from Colorado Technical University. And I will hand it over to Dr. Daines. Thank you.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join me today for this presentation. And I want to say a couple of things to start out, just in case. I live in Colorado Springs and it is very windy here today. So hopefully you won't hear that in the background noise, and hopefully we won't have any electricity or internet issues as a result of that. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you see me looking sideways, I do my very best to look at the camera, but I do have some vision issues. And so I have a big monitor right here off screen. And so if you catch me looking sideways, I promise you I'm looking at my own slides, not distracted there. So with that, we'll get started. So I am Jennifer, and I'm here today to talk about how our institution has been working on a project to really address issues surrounding our language changing in terms of how our students speak and how we might be able to help them with that and reduce cognitive load to help with them with stress. And I'll talk all about what that means and what our students are like here in a minute. Okay, so here's a roadmap of where I'm going today. I'm going to start by talking about kind of our story, our institution, how we got here, how we, for lack of a better word, discovered this quote unquote problem. It's not necessarily a problem, it's a challenge, how we discovered it. And then I'm going to talk about cognitive load and what that means, and particularly cognitive overload and how that happens, what the effect is, and how we can help our students with it. And then finally, I'm going to talk about kind of the way ahead. Okay, now that we know this information, what is our institution doing about it? And then maybe if we have time at the end, we can brainstorm other ways that we can help our students reduce cognitive overload. So here we go. First of all, our story. So we are a large open enrollment university. So we get students from all over with very diverse backgrounds and experiences and challenges that they're facing in life. One of the things I always like to point out, because I myself am an advocate for veteran students, is that we do have a fairly significant veteran student population at our institution. And some of this work we're doing really intersects with that population, as well as others, because the work we're doing, I truly believe, can help all students have a better experience and be more successful. In addition to our diverse student population that is mostly and historically working adults, that is, they've been in the workforce in some capacity and are going quote unquote back to school, some with transfer credit, some without. That's our historic population, but even as I speak, our student population is starting to trend ever slightly younger and younger. In my class, my own personal English class that I teach last session, I had 5 students who were 18 and 19 years old, fresh out of high school. And that was a new experience for me teaching here, because hasn't always been the norm. Another thing about our institution is that innovative technology is actually in our mission statement. We are all about innovative technology. We love trying out new toys, for lack of a better word. If we think something can help our students, we're going to try it out and we're going to pilot it and we're going to analyze whether it worked or not, measure the results. We're all about that. And that element of our mission was the genesis of some of this work that we've done and what I'll be talking about. Which leads me to my next point. We have an application at our institution that we call CTU Messenger. And what it is a two-way messaging system that is embedded within our own student-facing mobile app, which is basically allows students and faculty to text message each other without us faculty having to give our personal cell phone numbers out to our students. It has a lot of functionality, and it really is the driving force behind some of the things we found out about our students and what we're doing about them. And then I also wanted to tell you a little bit about me before we get started. So my focus is I am responsible for a group of 100 level general education courses. Primarily, I oversee the math and the English, as well as a couple other courses here and there as part of our overall general education leadership team. So I'm focused on those newer students, those 100 level students and the challenges they face primarily in their math and English courses, which you'll see my focus on the English courses and kind of how we got to where we are here in a minute. I also come to this work with a background of, as I said, being an advocate for veteran students, because I am a veteran myself. I spent 12 and a half years in the Air Force, and so I bring that background with me. Like I told my students in my class last night, my English class last night, we bring all of ourselves to every text we read, every sentence we write, and that certainly applies to the work that I'm doing and that I'm going to share with you here in a little while. So my background is I'm a veteran, I'm a mom, as I will point out, it's very pertinent to this discussion. A few years ago, I survived a mild traumatic brain injury, and that will become very pertinent to our discussion here in a minute. So that's me, what I'm bringing to the table with this, and that's really why I got interested in this work. So with that, I'll move on. So let me talk about CTU Messenger, this two-way messaging app that we have for our students. When we first implemented this, and it's been a few years ago now, as an individual faculty member, my thought was, well, this is great. We can answer student questions. If they message us, I guess I'll download the app to my personal phone and talk with my students this way, you know, for the ones who want to do that and don't want to do email. Over time, what we learned, well, let me back up. Me, like a lot of other faculty, didn't really think that it would catch on as well as it did. When it first started, there was a lot of concern that, well, students won't really use this, will they? Will they really message their faculty member? I would never message my instructor when I was in school. And we'll talk about that in a minute too, how life was different when most of us went to school. What we found, however, is our students latched onto this. They loved it. And this slide really illustrates that. We did some analysis. I can't take credit for this particular analysis. A colleague of mine did it. And what she discovered was that when faculty send an email, our students only read about 10% of those emails. And I don't think that surprises anyone who teaches. I think we all know that, right? Our students don't read emails. We have an adaptive learning platform in Telepath that's built by Realize It, that has an internal, you can send messages within that application. And we found within that, about 15% of those messages were being read by students. But when we looked at messenger data, it had an 83% read rate. That's amazing. I think it's higher now. I think this slide is, it might be even higher than that now. But 80% read rate, that's incredible. So we realized pretty quickly that our students are in the Messenger app. And if we want to connect with them, that's where we need to be as faculty too. So that's the first lesson we learned. The amazing thing is it's working. So for just some numbers to throw out there. So 3.3 million exchanges took place in 2020 over Messenger. 20,000, so we had an average, our institution's about 26, 27,000 students, 20,000 of them were using Messenger each month. That's a huge number. On a daily basis, faculty were sending 6,000 messages. And students were sending 5,000, which means students were engaging at this at a much higher rate than they do email or other communication. Also, faculty were more responsive in Messenger, answering students in less than 2 hours on average, which is unheard of from when I went to school, put it that way. Okay, so what does that mean? It means our students were in Messenger and they really latched onto this and they were connecting and talking with their faculty regularly, daily even. And this is very different from when I went to school and probably how you went to school. All of us on this call, and I'm talking about as an undergrad. So this was us, I'm assuming. We went to school in a very different world. And I always tell my faculty team that our students are not us when we went to school. Even if they're the same age, even if we have similar backgrounds, it's a different world. Communication with the school and with faculty and or work, because kind of it applies to, was very limited, right? There were set hours where you communicated. There were boundaries where some of those aren't present anymore. When we went to school, our interaction with the school, especially with our instructors, was centered on physical meetings. Now, I was an undergrad 20-something years ago. I actually went to the U.S. Air Force Academy, which is highly residential, right? You're there 24/7. It's highly structured. And I interacted with my instructors for the most part in class, or if I physically went to their office for office hours. Occasionally, I might have sent an email. Then fast forward to when I was in my master's program, which was about 10 years after I started my bachelor's. So 10 years down the road now. I ended up doing a master's program as an adult student because I was still serving in the Air Force at the time. And I remember one particular summer, the school was on a summer break. It was a Saturday morning. I was asleep in bed, heavily medicated because I had just had my wisdom teeth removed. And so I was out. I was not thinking about school. My husband knocks on the door, slowly opens it, has a phone in his hand, and it's not a cell phone, by the way. It was an old, cordless phone. And he says to me, "Your professor's on the phone." And I'm thinking, what? What did I do? It's summer. What professor? And why is he or she calling me? It was just really shocked. I was not used to that. Well, it turns out that he was calling me just to, we'd connected a little bit, and he was sharing some research he was doing over the summer that he thought I might find interesting, and he just wanted to let me know about it. It was a friendly phone call. But I was so shocked because in my mind, professors and students didn't interact outside of class, really. And it was kind of I felt a boundary shake, for lack of a better word. So, and when most of us, not only when we went to school was it different, and maybe it was like that for you as well, but I'm going to bet a lot of us began our teaching careers also in a different world. I know I did. I started teaching as an adjunct in 2007 when I left the Air Force. And, life was very different. Life was different 3 years ago. I think if most of us really think hard, it's a different world than it was 3 years ago prior to COVID. Things have changed. And along with that, our students were different 3 years ago. They need different things from their faculty than they did before. Their world is different. The stresses they face are different. And I just don't think we can compare. And so, like I said, I tell my faculty a lot of times, I said, you can't think of your students in terms of what life was like for you when you went to school, because it's very different now. And so that really made me think, okay, if I can't use as well my own experiences in school to really understand my students, how can I understand my students? Well, at our institution, we are able to analyze this messenger data and look for trends and do keyword searches and really find out what our students are saying and thinking from all this, millions of messages that we saw in 2020. And we saw the same amount, if not more, last year. And what we found out from analyzing those messages, what our students were telling us was they want that connection with faculty. They're not like me, who thinks, why is my professor calling me? That's a boundary crossed, right? Our students today, especially at our institution, are not like that. They want and need that personal connection with their faculty. And I don't think this is surprising. If you've been in an administrative role in higher ed for more than 5 minutes, you know that every time we survey students, whether it be end of course survey or focus groups or just going into the classroom and talking with them, they never say that they loved a class because the textbook was great or the assignments just were wonderful. It's always because their instructor cared about them. And so I don't think this connection thing is new. I think the way we communicate it is new. But anyway, another thing we found, we historically have thought, well, some of our students experience serious life challenges while they're going to school. Well, maybe it's many students. But what we found out from the messenger data was that it's actually most of our students. The majority of our students are experiencing real life challenges, especially over the last 3 years, that are impacting their ability to attend classes, get their work submitted, and as we'll talk about in a minute, understand some of the assignment directions and content that we present to them. We found out, and as faculty, we were shocked by this, that our students are confused by what we thought was very simple, straightforward, clear, concise assignment instructions. They were messaging things like, I don't understand how to do this. Is this what you mean? You know, and as faculty, part of me is wanting to say, well, yes, that's what it says. Of course, what else do you think I mean? They just weren't understanding it. And we were seeing these messages pop up as we analyzed this, and it surprised us. So we thought, okay, we've got to take a look at our assignment instructions and not only what we require in the assignment. So for example, if we say write 2 pages, you know, is that clear? As well as the submission process. We assumed our students knew how to submit assignments and that the process was easy and straightforward. But when we did a deep dive, what we found was that it's not as clear and straightforward as we thought. And so that was something we had to work on. The other thing, obviously, that we found through the messenger data analysis was that our students are hesitant, resistant, and even scared to death to reach out and ask for help. These are adult learners. And if you work with adult learners, you know that they really tend to dig themselves in a hole and not ask for help until it's too late. And that was clear. But one thing that the C2 Messenger app is doing is it's opening those lines of communication between faculty and students to where we're getting students more comfortable at asking for help, because we're reaching out first and saying, do you need help? I see this is going on. What can I do to help? Why don't we talk about this? You know, whatever. So that's one thing on a positive note. What I discovered is that these students who were so stressed out were similar to where I was 3 years ago. And at the risk of sounding like I'm contradicting myself, I said our students are not us when we were undergrads, but they were similar to me when I was in my doctoral program from 2013 to 2019, because I had a rough time of it. I got through the coursework fine. Coursework was fine, first 3 years fine. Go to enter that last year, that dissertation year, and everything fell apart. I was our typical student in crisis. Life happened to me, definitely. It just the short version, I had a significant death in the family that impacted me emotionally and mentally. I had a complicated pregnancy that resulted in a baby being born 2 months early and being in the NICU at the hospital for 2 months. So that was very stressful. And then when I was recovered from that, I got into a car accident where I suffered a head injury, which actually made it more difficult to write the dissertation very literally, because I as I'll talk about in a little while, some spelling skills and writing skills were actually impacted by the head injury. So the bottom line is life happened in a real way, and I got way behind to the point where I was about to wash out of the program, which stressed me out, because I knew that I needed to finish that doctorate, not only to advance in my career, but possibly even to keep my job. And so there was a lot of stress on me, real world stuff going on at this time. Also, as a bonus, I'm sure this has not happened to anybody else. During that time when I was not working on my dissertation, my department chair and my entire committee retired. So I had to start all over with a new committee and was worried about that. So this was me just going crazy, pulling my hair out. And the bottom line is I was terrified to reach out to the school and re-engage and ask, can I still do it? Can you help me? What do I need to do? I didn't even know the questions to ask. I was so terrified. Well, long story short, I was able to help through that. We tell our students have a good support system, know who that is. And I had a good support system, not only at home, but at work. And between my husband encouraging me and helping me and getting me through those rough moments where I was just an absolute mess, terrified to reach out, and some very generous work colleagues who said, we'll help you get this together, we'll help you think through this. I was able to get it done, obviously. However, as much as I think that my students might be dealing with those same challenges, there are other things they're dealing with that I wasn't really dealing with at the time. There are other challenges they face that make it even more critical for us to be supportive in terms of reducing their stress, reducing their cognitive overload. One, our students in a lot of cases are dealing with trying to do homework with children right in their way, and not just in the house, but literally on their lap. Our students are tired from working all day long at stressful jobs. They barely have the energy to get their work done at night, especially to read complicated things and understand them and be able to make sense of them. That's one thing. A lot of our students are working shift work, fast food, medical industry, other industries where it is not consistent in terms of the times and the days in which you work. So when we tell them, well, plan out your week to do your assignments to make sure you get them all done, it's hard for them to plan when they're doing a lot of shift work. They may have very emotionally taxing jobs, especially over the last 3 years. During this pandemic, a lot of our students who work in the medical field are just at the end of the rope in terms of stress. And then finally, we have a student population where many of our students are not only dealing with taking care of children, but they're kind of in that sandwich generation. They're taking care of children and they're taking care of their parents, or they're worried about their parents getting COVID, getting the things they need in terms of groceries, things like that. Those of us who kind of are in that middle age group tend to worry about both our children and our parents, more so over the last 3 years. And our students are like that as well. In addition, I'm going to add to their stressors. They've had to deal with this pandemic like we all have. They've had to worry about it in terms of how to stay safe, how to be healthy, how to get the care you need, as well as the life disruptions. The social disruptions that we've all seen plastered all over the news for the last 3 years are stressful. And our students were dealing with all sides of it. We had students who were in areas where there was physical violence near them. We had students who were emotionally and mentally upset by what was going on and the arguments behind it and the meaning of those things. We also had students who were in the National Guard who got deployed to areas, I think two summers ago, when some of those protests were turning violent. We had people deployed. Excuse me. So our students were feeling the impact of everything that's been going on the last 3 years. In addition, they were quarantined at home. Some of them trying to deal with that, trying to deal with children at home, trying to keep themselves safe. Some of them with difficulty wearing masks just because of other issues, could be PTSD, could be other traumas in their life that make that a little difficult. And just the bottom line, all the worry that goes with all of these things. And I don't need to go into that too much. We've all been there. We've all survived the last 3 years. But our students were dealing with this on top of everything else. And when I was in grad school or in undergrad, I didn't have to deal with this, right? This is something new. So that was another thing our students were dealing with. And then on top of that, what did we do to them? Take a look at this question. And this is just a sample question from one assignment in one course, an English course, obviously. Here's the question we pose to the students. George still needs to work on using a comma and a coordinated conjunction to bring two independent clauses together. Which of the following sentences by George uses commas correctly? And then just try to read those examples. I don't know about you, but I teach this. And even just reading that, I'm getting a headache. And trying to think, okay, I've got to dissect this. I've got to reread it. Who is George? What is he doing? There's just a whole lot of information and a lot of text there for me as a student to try to dissect and figure out what am I being asked and what's the right answer. We're doing that to them on top of it. Here's another example. I'm just going to let you read that for a minute. Okay, hopefully you got through that, at least the paragraph. But if you notice this question, and this is a typical question, you know, for all intents and purposes, there's nothing really wrong with this question. It's a common application question for a student to answer in a class where the lesson is on grammar, right? They have to read a paragraph. They have to understand this paragraph with everything else that's been going on that they have to worry about. They have to now focus and understand this paragraph and glean information out of it. Then they get to the question, which of the following is wrong with the given paragraph? So they go to look at the answer choices. Choice A, the first sentence is a run-on. Well, now I have to go back up to the paragraph to look and see if it's a run-on sentence. Then I might go through all the other choices, doing the same thing, looking up, looking down, back at the paragraph, back at the choices. Given that everything our students are dealing with, that's a lot of work taxing their brain. And it just made me think, is it necessary for us to do this to our students? So I want to talk for a minute about something called cognitive load. And you've probably heard this before. I am admittedly not an expert in cognitive load. This is why I tell you, when I started reading about it and thinking about the work we were doing in academics and bringing my own experience as a traumatic brain injury survivor to the table, that's when it started clicking. So that's a perspective I come from. So first of all, cognitive load. It's simply the level of effort required to reason, think, or problem solve. The cliche term we've all heard is brain power. Think of it like brain power, the effort it takes to think through something. That's cognitive load. And you can think of it like a computer processor, right? We've all been there when a computer starts, our computer starts going haywire, things aren't working right, stuff starts locking up. That's our computer experience, that processor experiencing overload. It happens when so overload happens when there is too much stimuli, right? Too many different things out here. Could be visual, could be too much noise, could be too many things I'm worried about. I often use the phrase, things hanging over my head, right? Too many things I'm worried about or thinking about on the back of my mind. Cognitive overload results in basically a decreased ability to process information and to think through. It takes you longer to answer something. It takes you longer to read something. You maybe have to read it 2 or 3 times. Just like with a computer. We've all seen this screen before. This is when our brain hits cognitive overload, right? And we don't want our students to be in that position. They have enough going on. And so one thing that we're trying to consider at our institution is, how do we reduce this overload for our students so that they can focus on what they really need to learn, right? So they can focus on that, because that's what we're assessing them on. Okay. So in addition to all those challenges I talked about earlier, we know what cognitive overload feels like, because I'm sure we've all experienced it at some point. In traffic, in crowds, right? If you get in traffic, it's a little harder to drive. You kind of have to think more. You have to be aware more. It takes more brain power. In a crowd, You have to have situational awareness, and know what's going on. And that's a little bit more complicated than when you're not in those situations. Here's a couple more. At the airport. I don't know about you, well, especially after not traveling for a few years, but even before that, airports are places where there's a lot going on. It's very busy. There's a lot of noise. There are signs and directions everywhere. You don't quite know where you're going. There's security people standing all around, and that might be making you nervous. So there's cognitive overload that we all have going to the airport. Here's another one, DMV. I don't know about you, but I'll share a brief story. So this was after I had a head injury. Shortly after that, my driver's license expired and I had to go to the DMV to get it renewed. It was a Saturday morning. Our DMVs here are open on Saturdays. And I went there, and keep in mind, I was experiencing pretty severe cognitive overload, partly as a result of the brain injury. So I had that going on too. But I remember getting in there and just for a split second, I was confused about where do I stand for my picture? Now, where do I go? There were people yelling all around, the other people working there were yelling next and calling out numbers. And there was somebody over here getting mad because it was taking a long time. And the person told me, stand there. And I didn't understand what she meant. Hopefully not everyone has had that extreme example, but we can probably all at least relate to these types of situations where there's just so much going on that it adds to the confusion, and you really have to think hard about what you're doing. This type of situation can be useful, though, in training exercises, right? In training for stressful situations. I'll give you an example. When I was an undergrad, like I said, I went to the Air Force Academy, and as part of the military training aspect of that program, we went through an exercise where we had to quickly identify whether a picture shown on a screen in front of us was friend or foe. And this was a useful exercise for future pilots, right? They need to be able to make quick decisions and make those judgment calls in a split second. In order to add to the stress intentionally, what the staff did was put us, it sounds like a torture hazing thing. And I guess thinking about it, it kind of is a hazing ritual, but there was a purpose for it in this context. They stacked some mattresses on the floor, put a rocking chair on top of it, had me sit in the rocking chair while some staff members shook the rocking chair, while another one squirted me in the face with a bottle of water. Oh, and the lights were out, and there was loud, like heavy metal music playing. Cognitive overload. As I said, this was for a particular reason, a training exercise. And what I had to do was they would flash pictures in front of me, and I would have to say friend, foe, based on what the picture was. Well, inevitably, because of all of that going on, somebody's going to make a mistake, right? So I made a mistake. I said foe to Abraham Lincoln. And then, of course, everybody went wild, and they were, you shot Abraham Lincoln, or would have, or whatever. These type, and that's an extreme example. And there's a place for that in very extreme, stressful training environments. But our students in our English classes aren't in that environment, and they don't need that level of stress. And yet we are essentially sometimes, just not us personally, but because of life circumstances, because of the pandemic, and because of some of the language we're using with them, we're inadvertently having the same effect as me in that situation. So look at this again. This is the same paragraph that I showed earlier. Students have to, like I said, dissect this paragraph, understand what's going on, understand the answer choices, look back up and down. That's a lot of work to answer a simple question about where does a comma go. And they're doing this after a hard day of shift work, maybe after a hard day working in a medical situation where it's very high stress, both emotionally and mentally. Or they may have been on Zoom all day long. And I'm sure like me, many of you have been in those situations where you're on these long Zoom meetings and it's just taxing. it causes fatigue. And at the end of the day, you're like, I can't focus. My brain needs a break. Well, our students are the same way. They're getting to the point in their day where they need a brain break at the exact time that we're asking them, that's the time they set aside to do their homework. And it's the exact time when, we have to ask ourselves, no wonder they're having problems. No wonder they're messaging us saying, I don't understand what you mean in this assignment. Their brain literally can't process the question or the directions. Okay. In extreme situations, and this again, I bring in my personal experience, and in extreme situations, this cognitive overload doesn't just result in having to read a question a few times or maybe having to think really hard to understand the answer choices. In extreme situations, cognitive overload can result in, it can impact speech. People can forget words or mix up words. Words come out as sounds, as they come out as words that sound like the word you meant, but aren't quite the word you meant. If you've ever interacted with either someone who has a significant brain injury or someone who is experiencing Alzheimer's or dementia type symptoms, the word mixing up and forgetting words is an absolute key symptom of that. And severe cognitive overload can do that. It can also impact mobility and balance, and people can have balance issues, walking crooked, misjudging spatial distance, and running into things. Now, these are extreme examples, and I'm familiar with them only because I had an extreme life event that kind of led to this for a while. Put it mildly, the balance issues, I was walking like a zombie at some point, kind of shuffling and shifting, but not quite right. It is extreme. However, what we learned from our messenger data was our students are dealing with extreme stressors. Remember that slide where I said most of our students are dealing with extreme life challenges? What I have learned over the course of the last year looking at this issue is that me, Jennifer, brain injury survivor, a lot of stress in my life, am not atypical. A lot of our students are facing those same type of extreme issues. So what can we do as educators to help them with that, to reduce that cognitive overload so that they can focus on what they actually need to focus on? Here's an exercise. Take a look at this, and I'll go ahead and read it. Which of the following transition words would a writer use to provide an illustration of a general idea or point? There's nothing really wrong with that question. But look at this one. What transition word can a writer use to illustrate a point? It's much more simple. It doesn't hurt the head. I'm not trying, and I'll dissect the reasons why in a second. All I did, whoops, let me back up. I'm sorry. Got ahead of myself. All I did was change two words. I changed which of the following to what. And it may not sound as precise, but it is much more plain and direct for our students. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I also changed the word could to can, and I'll tell you why. Okay. So why the difference between those two? Well, the second question, the simpler question, it took less brain power to understand. If you're sitting here reading it, you didn't have to quite think as hard on that second one. You could get straight to your answer options. Even here, I'm kind of illustrating this point. You could move on to the answer choices instead of more quickly, which is correct. We say faster because that's what our students understand. That's how we talk, right? Also, that word changed from would to can. And let me go back up and show that real quick. Apologize for the clicking here, but I want to. Okay, so here's the original. Which of the following transition words would a writer use? I changed it to can, and there's a subtle difference there because by saying would, as a student, I may be thinking at that point, well, I don't know what a writer would do. I'm not a writer. You're already starting to reinforce that limiting belief of I can't do this. By changing it to can, you've created a sense of possibility, right? Oh, I can do this. What transition word can I, as a writer, use to illustrate the point? You just made a subtle one word change, but it's a subtle difference in sentiment for that student reading it. Okay. And I know something about this too, from my personal experience. So this little cartoon represents my oldest daughter. She's 20 years old now. Her name is Reagan. When Reagan was in high school, she had such severe test anxiety that, let's say an algebra class, for one thing. When she was doing algebra, she could practice at home. I would get her in front of a whiteboard and have her do a test review kind of on the whiteboard with me helping her and reminding her of things, and she could do it. She knew the content. She was just fine at algebra. But you sent her to school and tell her she's taking a test, and all of a sudden she forgets how to spell her own name. And I am not making that up. We got a test back with her name spelled wrong. It's that cognitive overload, and what it was that stimulus, that worry of, oh my gosh, I'm taking a test. That's what we had done to her in that situation. And so I think sometimes we might do that to our students as well. So one of the things we looked at with this language change is how can we eliminate test language, right? That language that says, that conveys you're being tested, you're being judged, don't get this wrong, don't mess it up, your grade depends on it, right? We want to reduce that kind of language to eliminate that trigger for students. Again, going back to our diverse student population of adult learners, many of them struggle with test anxiety in those situations. And so we wanted to help with that. So just those little word tweaks may help. And I'm not saying this is the best approach, the right approach, but it's an approach that we are experimenting with because we think it can help reduce some stress for our students. So here's what we're doing with curriculum. We're editing our content and our questions, and this is an ongoing project. We're editing them with an eye toward plainness. How can we speak plainly to our students? As I often teach my students in my English classes, we know language changes over time, and it changes in response to the needs of speakers of that language. For example, the current APA manual says that the word their, T-H-E-I-R, should be used as a singular pronoun in gender-neutral situations. So if you don't know the gender, or if you're trying to be inclusive, you should use the word their. 20 years ago, the APA manual did not say that. That has been a change, and it changed because speakers, those of us who speak English on a daily basis, needed a word to use when we either didn't know the gender or when we were trying to be inclusive. Because I'll tell you why, we got tired of typing he or she. That took too long to type. We stopped doing that. So there was a period of time where academic writing demanded we say he or she, or he/she, or more recently, just rewrite the sentence to avoid that conflict, right? I remember telling students that many years ago. Now, but speakers didn't go for that. They said, no, I just want to use their, and everybody knows what I mean, and we all say it. And so the written rules have caught up with the way we speak, at least in that one instance, that one example. And so that's all we're doing, is kind of looking at the language we're using and saying, okay, is this the way our students communicate? How can we make it simpler to help them A, understand, B, reduce all that extra stuff that they don't need, so that they can focus on the content we're assessing them on, not on trying to dissect a word problem in an English course. Which brings me to my next point. We wanted to remove some of those complicated scenarios. There's a time and place for that, but it wasn't in our just regular adaptive learning, quick questions throwing at students. That wasn't the time and place for that, because students were getting hung up trying to figure out what it meant, let alone the answer choices. And then the other thing we're doing is we're trying to make sure that the language we're using in our assignment instructions and in our assessments are written in such a way that allow the students to focus on what we're really assessing, not on all this extra stuff. So big picture way ahead, that's what we're doing in curriculum wise, but kind of big picture overall. We're also working with our faculty to try to help them better understand our student population. Just like I talked about earlier, our students are not us when we were in school. And yet I think it's human nature for us to say, well, they should be able to do this. My English composition class made me do that. They should be able to do this. We base it on our own experiences because that's human nature, but we've got to remember that it's a different world now. We're also evaluating, like I mentioned in the previous slide, we are evaluating our assessments, which includes our directions to our assignments, as well as the actual questions for plainness, right? We want to use plain language that our students can easily digest.
I'm double checking. Has Jennifer frozen for anyone else, or is this on my end? Okay. All right, got it. So we'll wait a minute here. I think she probably, oh, hi Jennifer, are you there now?
Hello.
Yes, you
We want to
froze
teach
for
our
us for a minute.
faculty to handle technology issues when their internet goes out in the middle of a presentation. Let me get this back up. Sorry.
And just a time check. Well, we have about 3 minutes left.
Oh, let me get through this real quick. I apologize. Okay. So we're also working with our faculty to help them shift their language so that we are not as formal and kind of distant in our own communication with our students. Okay, final thoughts in closing. So what really brought this home to me was a situation I remembered back when I was working on my doctorate. I had an assignment in one of the courses to interview a leader in higher education. So I chose to interview a colleague who is very accomplished, older woman, PhD in engineering, one of the smartest women I've ever met. And I interviewed her for an hour and a half. And then I went to transcribe that interview. And what I realized was that we didn't speak in complete sentences. We weren't formal when we were just talking. We weren't grammatically correct. And so I would just challenge all of us, including me, as we go forward, to not only focus on shifting our language, but shifting our mindset to be less focused on our class and more focused on our individual students and what those individual students need from their instructor in terms of connection and communication. A lot of tentacles to this work, but it's exciting. It's a work in progress. You know, I look forward to sharing the results at some point, but we're just getting started on it. So with that, I will thank you for your time today. And I didn't know if there were any, I couldn't see the chat pod to see if there were any specific burning questions in there.
There were a couple of recommendations for things
great.
like Grammarly and plainlanguage.gov to talk about kind of concise diction, I think. Those were the couple of things that I was seeing. And then also some statements about how concise language is also more visually easier to consume. Yeah. So those were the ideas in chat.
No, those are great suggestions and I appreciate it. And we're, you know, the Grammarly and things like that are definitely being used more in a professional setting. And it will be very interesting to see how we incorporate those ideas in academic settings go forward and what that means for other areas of the classroom, right? In terms, if students have this tool. So those are great ideas. And I appreciate your attention today. I do apologize for the brief hiccup with the internet and just thanks and have a great day.